This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, where support begins in the application process and continues beyond graduation with resume help, interview preparation, and more through their Office of Career Connections. Learn more at lcdistraction.org. Landmark College. Learn your way. Succeed uniquely. Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell with a mini episode of Distraction. Welcome. You know, our podcast is growing, and it's wonderful. We're turning into the community I always hoped we would be, could be, and we couldn't possibly do it, obviously, without you. So thank you for subscribing, for downloading, for sending in your comments and questions and telling your friends. Today in this mini, I'd like to tell you about a new book that I've written. It won't come out until June, so I'm giving you advance notice. But the reason I wanted to talk about it now, it is completely unlike anything I've written before. And I think indirectly I'm encouraging all of you to consider doing the same thing. This is my 20th book. But it is unique because it is not a book of advice. It's not a book of how to manage worry or how to manage ADD or about raising children or about forgiveness, other topics I've written about. This book is a memoir. It doesn't take me into my work with ADD. It takes me way back into my childhood and into my early training in psychiatry. It was quite a different experience for me writing it. In one sense, it was relieving because I didn't have the burden of giving advice. On the other hand, it challenged me to open up my own life and really write, in the memoir vein of what actually happened. And the title of the book sort of gives you an idea of what did happen. The title of the book is Because I Come from a Crazy Family, The Making of a Psychiatrist. And the opening line says, I come from an old New England WASP, a family characterized by the WASP triad of alcoholism, mental illness, and politeness. And, I loved my family. This is not in any way an attack on them. It's very loving toward them. But they were, drunk and crazy. And they were wonderful. They were intelligent. They were interesting. They were eccentric. They were very, very much marching to the beat of their own drum. But I grew up in a kind of chaos that really, isn't what you'd recommend for somebody. And yet things turned out pretty well for me. And I suppose that's the story, or at least part of the story. And then the second half of the book is sort of how those experiences led me into the world of psychiatry and the wonderful, interesting experience I had early in my training working with the seriously mentally ill at a place called the Massachusetts Mental Health Center, which was a unique kind of hospital in that it was, on the one hand, a Harvard teaching hospital, so they had, very highly qualified teachers. On the other hand, it was a state hospital, state mental hospital. So we had, the most difficult cases and in many ways, the most neglected segment of society, namely the indigent mentally ill. Mental illness carries its own stigma, and living in poverty carries its own stigma, and you put the two together. And that's a group of people that are pretty much without a voice. And those were the people I learned from. Those were the people who taught me. They were my textbook, if you will, and I write about them really lovingly. I have incredible memories of them. One man in particular, so many wonderful remarks, but I asked him one day if he'd come see one of my supervisors with me, and he said no, he wouldn't. And I said, well, of course you don't have to, but could you tell me why you don't want to? And he said to me, it's personal. It's so personal, even I don't know why. And that kind of remark, I mean, how many situations does that cover? It's so personal, even I don't know why. These are the kinds of things these folks would say to me, and they were Wonderful people. They were, the general public doesn't understand serious mental illness. They're afraid of these people. Your average investment banker is a lot more dangerous than your average person with a serious mental illness. And no offense to investment bankers out there. I love you all. But I'm just saying that in true serious mental illness, there's not so much danger as there is confusion. There's chaos. And these people are widely neglected, even by psychiatrists. Most psychiatrists don't deal with them because they're very. It's hard work. And now we have treatments that we didn't have when I was a resident back in the late 70s and early 80s. Now we have medications, most notably clozapine, that really have opened the doors of mental hospitals. So a lot of these people are able to live on their own. And one of those people actually wrote a piece for my memoir where she talked about her experience. And I had, when I was a first-year resident, she had asked me to borrow some money, if she could borrow some money from me. And we weren't supposed to lend money to patients, but I thought, gee, wouldn't it mean a lot to her? Well, I didn't have any money on me, so I gave her my debit card. And I said, go ahead out to the bank. And, that was a real no-no. But I thought if I gave her that responsibility and if I gave her that trust, that could really help her. And sure enough, she went out and she withdrew the money and she brought the card back to me, and she remembered it 30 years later as being not the, but a turning point in her getting better, in her recovering. Of course, the biggest turning point was when she got put on clozapine. But little moments like that where I was able to build on my firsthand knowledge growing up with a father who had a psychotic illness and a stepfather who was alcoholic and abusive, and my mother who followed him into the world of drinking, and a brother who also had bipolar disorder. And to me, this was not scary. It was sort of everyday life, and it was interesting, and it was at times heart-wrenching, and at other times really funny. The world of psychosis can be funny. It can also be horribly, horribly miserable and heartbreaking. So don't get me wrong. I'm not painting a lighthearted frolic through the world of serious mental illness. But on the other hand, neither was it unremittingly dismal. And that's what the memoir tries to put across. It tries to lift some of the stigma, show the humanity of my own family, show the wonderfulness of them. And at the same time, how not having the right treatments really cost us as a family, really hurt us, and kept us from becoming, what we otherwise might have become. Well, I hope come June, I hope you'll get this memoir, because I come from a crazy family. But in the meantime, consider writing your own memoir, even if it doesn't get published. I found it to be an incredibly constructive experience. People say, was it cathartic? Well, not so much cathartic, I suppose, in one way, but more than that, it was a learning experience. It helped me integrate parts of my life that had sort of been just sitting out there as disparate parts. It helped me stitch them together into a single fabric, if you will. And I found it to be a wonderfully formative, it took work. It was painful at times, but I honestly loved doing it. And I would encourage you to think about writing your own memoir. It might get published, it might not get published, but it will be something that you can have and share with your own family and friends, and it will have extraordinary value. Well, I suppose as we approach Thanksgiving, this is my way of saying thanks to all the people who helped me along the way, and offer you to do the same if you get a chance to write about your own past. Okay, this is Dr. Hallowell, Ned Hallowell, for the podcast Distraction. Thanks so much for listening. And please do us a favor, go to what used to be called iTunes and is now called Apple Podcasts, just to keep you on your toes. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate Distraction. That really helps us a great deal if you would take your time to do that. Go to Apple Podcasts, what used to be known as iTunes, and rate our podcast called Distraction. Thank you so much. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our producer is the amazingly creative Sarah Curtin, and our engineer is the incredible genius Scott Person. Our theme song was developed by a man who lives in mystery, whose last name is Berman, and I can't remember his first name, but I'll find it out.